gentlemen, you're all very, very welcome. And this, of course, is a Festival of Lunacy weekend, end of July, the 1st of August. Noted for the coming of the harvest, celebration of the coming of the harvest. Off out there, you can see it nice and clearly this evening.
Yes.
Mount Callan in County Clare, another Lunacy height, and Proud Patrick, of course, in Mayo, and other ones around the country. They would have celebrated the coming of the new potatoes, new crops, etc. at this time of the year, hence the festivals, which was huge around Ireland, and it continued up here in Knockfield Hill till around 1910. They used to have a celebration on the hill, and then I suppose it gradually the population faded away. Seamus, if you just pass on the books and sign your name and telephone number on it and where you're from, just location and telephone number, keep it going around. And huge crowds, and we revived it here about 37, 38 years ago. And I did ask Canon Lyons in Ballingarry, that I said I was thinking of reviving the Festival of Lunacy. What do you think? Because it was an originally pagan festival, and pagans weren't that popular. And he said, if you believe in something, forget what they say, just go and do it. He was nearly 100 years of age at that time, a wonderful character, and he passed on. So we had that up in the hill for many, many years, and David and John O'Riordan, Bertie Henley, Marion, they were involved with us from the early years, and many of those people, many others as well, of course, have passed away since. Then we had the traditional rambling house in that section there for many, many years. We would have recorded all the older people in the area at Christmas time, May Eve, Pishow was Lunacy, all those particular things. Donegal Dolan was here with his radio programme on a few occasions as well. The house here, I bought this place 50 years ago, this year, 1973. It was in ruins at the time, and as you can see, we had added on a piece, and I'll skip the other part of that, leave out Limerick County Council and all that, because as Councillor Collins is here with us now. I might only upset him if I
not at all, far away.
If I told him all the books I had to go in now through to get this far, to still standing anyhow, I suppose is the main thing. And Henny Green, of course, was the last woman living on the hill. Sullivan's over there, the signs now for the sweat house, that area. Sullivan's, they were just died before she did, and she was the last one. She died in the 1st of January 1960. She was brought down in a coffin on a horse and cart. The road was almost closed in. She used to go down at night time, which was common enough because I'm from Tully, County Clare, and there was a man, Tommy Daly, there. We were about a mile from the town, similar sized town to Tully, the same as Ballingarry, and a man used to come, he'd go in playing cards, but he'd be going shopping at about 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night time, because the pub and the grocery were more or less all one at a time. So those people tend to come very late. And Henny Green, Tim Donovan, we'll tell you a little better about her in a minute. She used to also go down to town with the dogs at about 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night time. That's when she moved out. But another interesting aspect about that lady was that Biddy Elmer was a woman over the hill on the other side behind us. She has passed away now many years, but we have her recorded there over the years before. And she was active with us here. And when females got pregnant out of wedlock, and some families send them off because shame is scandal in the family, send them off to Letter Track or God knows where they sent them. But Miss Elmer, the woman here, Henny Green, she wasn't married. She used to take them in here and kept them here for the duration of pregnancy. And it was out of sight because she was the only one living apart from the ones that had died on the hill, so she kept them for that duration of time. And that was kind of an interesting thing with the news that we have heard in recent years, that she did her duty in that way. And she took in more than them as well, Tim, you were saying. That's a prompt for you. Right. She took in more than
she did indeed,
women.
Yeah. If I can just say, first of all, my name is Tim Donovan. I live in the town of Rathkeil, and my dad was the chemist there. But he came from a big family of farmers in West Limerick, and he had a terror of young fellas like me contacted around the town, so it was a case of go back and learn how to milk cows in the farm, or maybe go up to Ballingarry. Darby, your uncle wasn't married at the time. He could do a helping hand with the grocery. So I was 8, I don't think I was 9, I was 8 anyway, sent off on my bike to Ballingarry, and there wasn't much there to amuse anybody. But Darby had a little grocery shop, you see, and Hanny Green was something of a recluse. She was ashamed to come down to Ballingarry with her post office book to get the pension, because she was ragged and dirty, and the goats always followed her. So anyway, I was listening to, I think it was probably Radio Luxembourg, when Darby was called, would he drive a crowd off to a dance. Darby took off, of course, left me alone in the house, and about 12 o'clock there was a knock on the window. Are you there, Darby? Are you there? Have you my messages? I opened the side window, and honest to God, I was terrified. She looked like a witch. Poor woman was totally black in rags, and the goat was behind her. And I never experienced a goat, is it on heat or whether they're rotting or whatever, but the smell was unbelievable. And that was poor Henny. But Darby said, look, you gave her the messages and she'll come again, and maybe you'll never meet her. But one of the other stories about Henny then was, one of the, I think there was Kelly's or Dale's, I'm not sure, but a girl in Ballingarry went nursing, and she brought back her Nigerian a girlfriend who was also nursing, and they came to Ballingarry, and every young fella in Ballingarry, I suppose, the first Negro ever seen there, and they started shouting black boot polish and how are you so shiny black and all that. So the girl got an awful teasing, and they eventually walked up here to Henny, and Henny kept them there, and the lady from Nigeria said she was the wise woman of Ballingarry, so she was made welcome. Yeah, that's my bit now and said them all.
Thanks. Thanks, Tim. It's nice to get a flash back to the past, and of course there are many, many stories told about her and her generation indeed. Sitting here beside me is a man I've known for many, many years, Tom Toomey, a wonderful character, wonderful man, a very knowledgeable man. As you know, he did a wonderful book there on the War of Independence period there, a huge book, about 500 pages, I think it sold out, he tells me. And done a huge amount of research, and I wasn't over familiar with too many talks being given on the Civil War. I think people were kind of keeping away from it. Now there's a few people missing tonight, which I'm glad of that. It will make life a lot easier for us all. And you're all very, very welcome. We're delighted to see such a nice turnout. This is probably one of the first nights we did this type of thing. We usually had different speakers. We used to do that for many, many years. Remember Easter 1916, we had various speakers on that one. This is the first one we've gone this road. And Dr. Horgan from Tralee, Dr. Tim Horgan from Tralee, he's a very well-known speaker. He spoke at Ballyseedy commemoration this year, and many others around the country as well. He'll be the next speaker in a few weeks' time, probably a month's time or thereabouts, so we will advertise that a bit stronger than we did tonight. My wife has been out to me there all evening, but I didn't advertise this properly, and probably it was just as well, because it wouldn't have fitted if I did it on the bigger scale. So he's a wonderful speaker as well, so we'll announce that one. Last Saturday I was in Ballingarry, the Commons. The address around here is the Commons. Common, this one is, but I was at the Common in Ballingarry last Saturday, and that is on the Kilkenny borders, with the McCormick's house with Smith O'Brien in 1848, with the rising, as the English called it, with the McCormick's cabbage patch. They have an annual famine memorial walk there every year. There was about 500 people at it, a huge crowd of locals. So we'll hopefully do that, I think, in October, and assume the weather won't be anything worse in October than it has been in July. So we'll hopefully advertise that. Sadly, around this part of Limerick, I find, compared to back beyond Newcastle West, and I know we have an awful lot from the Newcastle west side here tonight as well, it doesn't get that much involvement of people, and we thank the Red Keel people for joining, the Patrick's Well people as well, and the others I don't know at the back. You're all very welcome. But we will advertise that, and hopefully that the word will be spread by people tonight that are here to encourage people to join that walk. We did have it last year. It was a great day also. It was in the middle of summertime, and we had Tom McSweeney of RT. He gave a very fine talk here. The place was packed with now, but that was advertised widely nationally, so there was good turnout. And that's about the size of it. So sorry now, Tom, to be making you so nervous while you're sitting there to give you a talk while I'm rattling and raving. It doesn't make life easier. Do you need a further introduction than that? No. Delighted to have him.
Thanks. I'm going to deal with the Civil War, a little bit what led up to it, and deal with it in terms of Limerick. Now, I will say one thing from the outset. The Civil War in Limerick was not that bitter. Thankfully, it was not that bitter for a variety of reasons, main reason being that the head cats that I call it in the IRA, by and large in Limerick, did not fall out. Anyhow, there are a number of things I would like to refer to. First thing is, we Irish have a tendency to do things the opposite way to others, right? We're not known as the contrary Irish without reason. The Hungarians are known as the Irish of Middle Europe, and the Finns are known as the Irish of Scandinavia, for the very simple reason that, like the Irish, they're a bit contrary. Anyhow, the first thing I'm going to point out, say, most freedom movements stamped out with a political concept and a political organisation which fosters a militant wing. We Irish did the reverse. We had plenty of militant wings between the volunteers, the IRB, the IRA, and they adopted, which was essentially a peaceful organisation, Sinn Féin. Right? Now, the thing about that is that when it came to accepting the vote into Dáil, some people did not feel that because they were from the militant wing, they didn't feel compelled to accept what was on offer from Sinn Féin politicians. Now, as I say, you can argue with that, that's what I would say. The other problem we have is they went to the first round of negotiations in London in October 1921. And the Boris Johnson of the time, alias Lloyd George, now Lloyd George the whole time was splitting the Irish and playing politics, dare I say, with them. He took De Valera into a room and told him essentially the facts of life as regards the Irish situation and what they were going to get or weren't going to get. Now, Dave didn't like what he heard, and he didn't come again, and he sent Collins instead. Now, I always believe that the two of them should have gone together. Regardless of what they came back with, they should have gone together, that it would be much more likely to hold the whole thing together if the two of them were together. Now, the proof, if you want, for that, whether people like it or not, is Gerry Adams and Matt McGuinness went to the Good Friday Agreement, and they stuck together. And they came back, you know, they held the movement together by sticking together. Now, I believe that could have happened in 1922, 21, 22. Moving on, the treaty vote, as I say, the treaty was passed on a vote of 64 to 57. Very close, relatively close. If 4 people changed their minds, it wouldn't have passed. It wouldn't have passed. Tension, Dev took his people out of the Dáil, and the tension began to ratchet up around the country. And in Limerick, in March 1922, there was a serious danger of an outbreak of hostilities. Now, a lot is said against Liam Lynch, but Liam Lynch came in and he damped down the possibility of an outbreak in Limerick in March 22. Now, to be fair, if hostilities had broken out at that stage, the Republicans were in a much stronger position, because even in Limerick was said he had 700 men, was said to Michael Brennan's 400. But as I say, the thing that was driving the conflict in the city was the old Irish conflict: small farmer, big farmer. Two individuals in Mid Limerick Brigade, Liam Ford and Sean Hurley. Now, Sean Hurley was the quartermaster, Ford was the OC. They came from the same area. Now, if you know where you know where the Cat's Cradle is in Balneety, Hurley's were across in Carrickmartin, straight across from the Cat's Cradle, and Ford's originally came from the townland of Scant, behind the Cat's Cradle. Fords were as such evicted tenants, and they were living in a place called Weasel Street. Now it says it was called Weasel Street because everyone was fighting with everyone. But anyhow, Ford and Hurley were connected through marriage, but I don't think it was a marriage of love. It was kind of there was conflict there. And as I say, the Fords and the Hurleys, they didn't get on, and this percolated through. Sean Hurley was pro-treaty, Liam Ford was anti-treaty, and they very nearly set off the Civil War in Limerick in March 1922. And were it not for Brennan, but to a large extent Liam Lynch. Liam Lynch tried might and main to avoid civil war, and I would say that Lynch tried so hard to avoid civil war that he actually lost the opportunity to win it, because by the time he accepted it was inevitable, the pro-treaty forces had been built up to a strong extent, very strong extent. As I said, the men in Limerick at the time, at March 22, was about 400 Free State, 700 Republican. But the thing was, Brennan conned Lynch. He had only 100 rifles. He had 400 men, but he had only 100 rifles. So what he did was, he marched 100 men into Limerick with rifles in the railway from Ross in that side, and put the rifles into a lorry and drove back out and sent in another 100. So as I say, if hostilities had broken out in Limerick at the time, there's no doubt in my mind that the Republicans would have prevailed. Anyhow, the fighting broke out in Limerick. The real deal broke out in the first week of July 1920 or 1922. Now, the Free State got in reinforcements from Dublin. The thing about the Republicans was they had 700, mainly from Cork and Kerry, but no real hope of reinforcements. Whereas Brennan had 100 men, or 400 men, he got in large reinforcements from Dublin, but more importantly, they got in armoured cars and artillery. And over the next couple of weeks, they prevailed in the city. The Strand Barracks, which was there on the north side, which was held by Republicans under a fellow called Connie Mackey, right? And the Free Staters had an artillery piece on the other side of the river at where the park is today, and they had free rein really to blast the, eventually they blasted the Republicans out of the Strand Barracks. The same thing happened throughout the city, that whilst Republicans fought valiantly, they were really up against it, as I say, at this stage, extra numbers, artillery and machine guns and armoured cars. So the Republicans decided to burn the barracks, the ones that they held. They held the, it was the Shaftesbury Barracks, that was burned. They held the, as I say, the Strand Barracks. I'm not sure about the artillery barracks. They held the artillery barracks as well, and they, as I say, they burned the barracks, and they gave up the city. Now, you could say there was about a fortnight's fighting. In that time, there were 11 civilians killed, 6 Free Staters, and 7 IRA. Now, a couple of years ago, there was the motorway was put in, around the city, and in the course of that, unfortunately, a memorial to, there was one Republican. He was a volunteer Slattery from Kerry. There was a memorial at Closagalla, and unfortunately, the memorial was in the way of progress, and I don't see it anymore now. I think there was an effort made to recite it, but I'm not sure if it was recited. Now, the Republicans moved out of Limerick in 2 directions. A lot of the Kerry lads went back towards Kerry, would say, towards Adair and Newcastle West. More of them then moved south into County Limerick, into what was known as the Kilmallock, Brewey, Rough Triangle. And for a fortnight, there was the only, dare I say, field, what could be described, field action for the whole of the Civil War was the Battle of the Kilmallock, Rough, Brewey Triangle. The forces fought it out for about a fortnight. But what happened then was, word came in that the Free Staters had landed troops in Kerry and in Cork. I think the Kerry fellas first and Cork fellas then, but either way, fellas from Kerry and Cork, who made up the vast bulk of the Republican forces in Limerick, and they moved back to their own places, which resulted that by default the Free State won the Battle of Kilmallock. Now, in Kilmallock, again, there were 7 Free State soldiers killed, 6 Republicans, and 1 civilian. Now, the civilian number is low, very low. Of the 7 Free Staters, right, it reflected the mix that were there. There was 4 Free Staters from East Cork, from around Middleton. A peculiar thing in Middleton, the whole company went Free State. Now, that was totally unusual in Cork. I don't know the reason why, but I suspect it's to do with personalities. Because the things with personalities and personality clashes in Ireland is, dare I say it, it's the cost of the land. Anyhow, they returned to their own areas, right? Now, on the way in early August, on the 4th of August, the Free Staters attacked in Adair, and Mrs. Hartney, Michael Hartney's wife, she was acting as a nurse, and she was in the Dunraven Arms. She was killed. Now, as I say, that she was one of a few women, because she was a Republican First Aid person, and she was one of the few women killed in the period. As I say, Free Staters prevailed in Adare because at this stage, as I say, they have artillery and armed cars, plus machine guns. Now, before I go further, I want to make one comment. There's a thing I feel all the time. There was a deviousness about the British. They said you couldn't trust a British politician more then than now. They armed the Unionists in the north, armed them to the teeth. Now I know they got guns before the war, the UVF imported arms, but by the time the Civil War started in down the south, the B Specials and the RUC were armed to the teeth by the British establishment. They also armed the Free State. It was the British that provided the armoured cars and the machine guns and the artillery. But they armed the Republicans as well, surreptitiously. Right? They had a ship down in Cork Harbour, the Upner, in which they had collected up all the spare weapons, ammunition, what have you. She was sailing around Cork Harbour with no convoy, no guard. It's only a matter of time till the Republicans twigged it, and they sent a boat out and they captured her from a launch and brought the ship into Ballycotton and offloaded the arms. Around the same time, a number of RIC sergeants in Clonmel had given the keys to the armaments in Clonmel to the Republicans. Now, that's not because they have a what's called for the Republicans win it, but if they keep the IRA and the pro-TT forces at each other's throats, all the better for their friends in the north. All the better for their friends. Now, you can argue with this, Mr. but no more than Boris Johnson today, I wouldn't trust Lloyd George 100 years ago. Moving on. As I say, Adare was captured on the 4th of August 1922, and then the push is on towards Newcastle West. And on the 7th of August, the Free State soldiers attacked Newcastle West and they captured Newcastle. Now, in the attack on Newcastle West, 2 youngsters from Limerick City, the O'Dwyer brothers, are killed. Now, there's a dispute about, one of them was killed directly in action. There's a dispute about the second lad as to whether he was actually executed or shot over the hand. Anyhow, either way, the pro-treaty forces captured Newcastle West. A few days later, as Seamus we were talking about today, at Strand, 2 men, I think they were on the way home from the pub, weren't they?
Yeah.
Ambrose and King. Yeah. And they were shot dead by a troop of, dare I say it, inebriated Free State soldiers. That's probably the best I can say about it. Now, as I say, essentially once Newcastle West and Adare have been captured, Kilmallock is captured, Bruy is captured, Bruff is captured, there wasn't really a guerrilla war in Limerick. Now, I won't say that it was over, it wasn't over, but the worst of the thing had passed through Limerick. As I say, fortunately, there weren't as many surreptitious killings as there were in other places, with the result that you don't have the bitterness, the great well bitterness. In East Limerick, interestingly, around that time, there was a garrison, a Free State garrison in Carrickandleash. Now the barracks in Carrickandleash had been burned, the RIC barracks had been burned, but they were staying in a big house, a big farmer's house, outside Carrickandlish. A fairly good garrison, right? But the Republicans came in, caught them asleep. The boys had been drinking, captured the bloody lot of them, right? Now, they left the ordinary private soldiers, they left them off. And they took 6 officers. Now, I interviewed one of the officers, so I do have the insight in it, right? And he named the 6 of them. He was Joe Graham. Now, Joe Graham died about 2000. Liam Hayes, Sean Lynch and John Joe Bryant from Galway, and a fellow called Mick Duckby from over around Doon. Now, I don't know who the 6th fellow was, but they were taken first to barracks in Tipperary. The Republicans were still holding it at that stage, and then they were transferred, Moria as prisoners of war, to Cork. But really, well, were they prisoners of war? Now, when Cork was invaded by the Republicans from the sea, there was a serious fear that these 6 Free State officers would be executed in reprisal. But a man who has been given a bad press by a lot of people stepped in, Dan Breen. Now, he had known these fellas from the rescue of Sean Hogan. He certainly would have known O'Brien and Lynch, and probably Hayes as well. And he stepped in and he had them released. And it was Joe Graham told me this. And he took them out to Glenmire railway station. And he said, now he says, lads, that's the road to Limerick. Fuck off and keep going. Now, before he did, he signed a safe pass for each one of them. Now, you'd say, did that happen? About 20 years ago, John Joe Bryant's son, Stan, showed me a copy of the safe pass. So it did happen. Like, a lot has been said against Breen, but I would say to you, there was no man did more to heal the wounds of the Civil War than Breen. And a couple of years ago, a man called Ambrose wrote a book describing Breen as the tug with blood in his hands. Now, there's a man at the moment down in Tipperary, John Connors. He's doing serious research into Breen, and we've discussed it a number of times. And we can only identify 2 fellas that he probably shot. And they were the 2 British intelligence officers, Smith and can't think of the second, that were shot above the Fellside in Dublin in October 1920. Now, he may not even have shot them. Tracy could have shot them. The 2, Tracy and Breen, shot their way out of Fellside that night. And the 2 British intelligence officers were killed. Now, they're the only 2 men that I could say Breen possibly shot them, or he shot one or other. Like, he shot no one at Solihull Beg because his gun jammed. He was made a pin pushing out of at Knockdown, because he was shot at Knockdown. He was shot again at Ashtown, where there was no British casualties, you know. So as I say, that's the only one I can identify. And yet, history has treated him very unkindly. Now, in addition, we'll say, he, as I say, left essentially got Lynch and Sean Lynch and John Joe Bryant off the hook in Cork, right? Now, the payback came in March 1923. Breen was captured along with the 2 MacDonagh sisters in Arrow, and he was captured by Free State forces. Now, the Free State forces should have gone back. The shortest route to Tipperary was back through the Glen, but that was too dangerous. So they came via Galway, and in Galway, John Joe O'Brien and Sean Lynch had Breen taken off the lorry and brought into O'Brien's bar, and let's say it, he swamped a few pints, and the 2 ladies are left outside on the lorry on their own, right? when they got to Tipperary, and this story is told to me by Pat Boyce, so you will know Pat Boyce. One of the women involved was Pat's grandmother, and the two ladies were taken up to the top story of the barracks in Tipperary and lived in a room. They were starving, they were ravenous, and bringing us below in the officers' mess, swamp and bacon and cabbage with the officers, free staters, with these enemies. Moving on. In my research in East Limerick, I found there was no real bitterness between a lot of the fellas out there. There was a case of the Graces in Garrydoulas who were Republican, anti-treaty, and Liam Hayes from Kilteely. Now the first story that I was told about him was Grace's sister, Mary Bridget, she went away to be a nun afterwards. She was cycling from Garrydoulas to Palace Green and on into Limerick to visit her brother because he was on hunger strike. But when she got to Palace Green, she met a fellow called Morris Mead. Now, some people will know of Morris Mead. He was a brilliant soldier, but ruthless. And there was an exchange of views between Morris Mead. Now, Morris Mead was in charge of the Free State Guard at Palace Green. There was an exchange of views between Mary Bridget and her friend, and he took the bag off Mary Bridget. And she had no choice but to walk back the 6 miles, 6 black miles back to Garrydoulas. But on the way, Liam Hayes and Sean Stapleton, 2 Free State officers, passed her in a car. And they stopped and said, "Mary Teresa, or Mary Bridget, where are you going to?" And she says, "I was going to visit my brother," says, "till one of your jackasses stopped me in Palace Green." So they said, "Jump in here and we'll give you, we'll take you to Limerick." So they went back and they picked up the bike off of Mead and took her to Limerick. Now, the bond between Liam Hayes and Dan Grace, it lasted, dare I say, forever, or for years. When Grace was the pensions officer for the Republicans in the 30s, he was the pensions officer for East Limerick. And when he was going to Dublin for pension business, he was staying with Hayes, a Free State officer. Like as I said, they never fell out. As I said, that story came to me, or that the letters that passed between them came to me from Grace's son. So you said, did it happen? It did happen. Now, as I say, I've only met, in East Limerick, I've only met one significant character who held a Civil War bitterness. Like the Malones. I think Des Long told me a story. When I was doing research on the War of Independence in Limerick, I was going out the county, as Seamus would know, looking for fellas to write away for witness statements for me. And Des said to me one day, he says, show me the list you have there. So he said to me, "Have you got Donegal Hannigan's witness statement?" "No," I said, "I haven't." Now, Des would be staunchly Republican, right? And Donegal Hannigan was the leading Free Stater in East Limerick. He says, "I might be able to get that for you." And I said, "Jesse, will you rise out of me? What chance have you with that?" And I said, "I have it." He said, Donegal Hannigan and the Malones, he said, never fell out. And I'm very good friends with the Malones. So he did get it for me. So as I said, the thing was, the whole time there was, there wasn't, as I said, there was only one or two really real bitterness, right? Now, in addition, in the city there were only 2 doubtful shootings. One was of Michael Danford. He was taken out and executed by a Captain Quinn at Ballysimon. There was a Free State officer, Lieutenant, I think Pat Hanrahan was his name. He was out walking with his girlfriend, and a neighbour of his, a fellow called Eberty Fitzgibbon, shot him dead. Now, as I say, they're the only 2 instances of shootings out of hand that I'm aware of. Not saying that there wasn't others, but they're the only ones I've come across. The thing in Limerick City was, it was really carry over from Clare. Michael Brennan was the OC of the Free Staters in Limerick, and he didn't really have an issue with Republicans coming in from Limerick or Tipperary. He had, however, with fellows from Clare, if they were Ballast men. Now, the only two fellows executed in Limerick during the Civil War were Hennessy and can't think of the name of the other lad. They were both from Clooney, Queen. Yes. Sorry?
Claude and Hennessy.
Yeah.
Claude and Hennessy,
Yeah. They were McMahon and Hennessy. They were Ballast men from mid-Clare. Like, you've got to go back to the War of Independence. And Brennan raided the post office in Limerick, looking for guns, Maria, to buy rifles. No, could have been an issue, should have been an issue for the Mid-Limerick Brigade. Themselves and Brennan got on very well, so they didn't make an issue of it. But it was the Ballast that reported Brennan to IRA headquarters, and with the result that Brennan was stood down. From that moment on, there was never going to be peace in Clare. When the Brennans were on their way to the convention, the IRA convention in May 1922, where different groups decided what way they were going on the treaty, they discovered that Ballots were on the train as well, the train from Limerick, and they sent a girl down the train to find out what way were the Ballots going on the treaty. And she came back and she says, "They're again it, lads. Find us in. We're for it in." No, that came to me from a cousin of Brennan's. You know, so that you say about what was going down. The old Irish curse personality, right? Brennan's decided that they were in favour of the treaty, not out of out of belief, but out of knowing the fact that their number one enemy was against it. As I say, the two men executed in Limerick were Barrett's men, and the three men executed in Ennis were Barrett's men. No, so as I said, that unfortunately the blight of personality clashes is there all the time. Oh yeah, just one, I'll mention one other one. A man who was looked upon as a kind of a diehard was Sean Carroll from Castleconnell. Now, I would question that Sean Carroll was a diehard. Okay, he controlled a small unit, Republican unit, around East Limerick, and mostly in Mid-Prairie in the Civil War. About 13 men. One of whom was Sonny O'Neill, the man, say, believed to have shot Michael Collins. But Carroll had a small column, about 13, 15 men. And at one stage, they had lamped on to the fact that Dick O'Connell, who was one of the Free State head book pats in Limerick, that Dick O'Connell, there said, was keeping company with a girl in Lisnagloi, and he was called to this house, and Carroll's men had decided they were going to take him out. When Carroll found out about it, he provided completely. Even though himself and O'Connell had gone different ways, there was still a respect there between them, and he forbade his men to shoot O'Connell. Now, towards the end of the Civil War, Morris Mead, the redoubtable Morris, was captured at Castleconnell in an action between Free Staters and Republicans. And that day, a man called Baggett had been killed by the Free State. He was a young man from Castleconnell. He had been killed. And two of Baggett's brothers were among the staunchest of Carroll's volunteers. But when Cal realised that he had Mead and that Ag's brother had been killed, he decided to leave Mead go, because he felt that, okay, in light of Mead's record in the War of Independence, and in light of the fact that God no man wouldn't save him if Bagot had found out that Cal had him as a prisoner. Oh yeah, just one last thing. As I say, I've mentioned Michael Danforth and Pat Hanrahan. They're the only two men shot out of hand that I'm aware of in Limerick City. As I say, and one was Republican, the other was Free State. That's it, Pat.
That was marking the spots for those people.
Sorry, there was one marking where Danforth was killed, but there are very few Free State memorials around the country. I've only ever seen one in Mayo. Now, you say, why is that? A lot of it is down, I believe, a lot of it is down to the Free State government, that they disowned the War of Independence as soon as they had power. You know, now the Republicans, you know, the argument about Ireland is this: it's probably the only country in the world where the narrative of the Civil War is largely written by the crowd that the side that lost it. And if you look at the history of the Civil War in Ireland, you will find it's largely written from the Republican side. You know, that the why is that? As I say, when the Free State got into government, I believe they lost contact with the working class support that they had. I mean, there was 59,000 Free State soldiers, and they don't come from the upper crust of society, but they had lost that. You know, they had lost contact with them.
As well as that there wasn't a huge bitterness between the soldiers. Why was there such a bitterness between the politicians for, say, 70 or 80 years afterwards? Why was it?
Votes. You know, like, I only know of one man, and I'm going to name him, in East Limerick, one active. Yes. Now, you can have a lot of fellas that think they were active, but they weren't. And they might be, you know, affiliating. But one serious operator who had Civil War bias. I mean, in fairness to Sean Carroll, I mean, he could have left his office, shoot Dick O'Connell. He could have turned a blind eye to the fact that they had Morris Mead, but he didn't. You know,
I disagree that there was bitterness between the politicians. I think there was more bitterness. No, I'm talking about back then. I'm not talking about now.
I didn't say it.
No, but I think the bitterness was between the families of the people involved more than the politicians.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
Now, I did hear, I tell you, who I got to know very well was Michal Herbert, right? And he told me they used to meet in the White House after county council meetings, and Dinny Quish would have been Finnegan, well, say whatever we'll say, and dare I say it, I think Jimmy Collins, right? Those guys used to meet up in the White House after the council meetings, and Herbert told me I'd go in and sit, he was only young for then, and I'd be trying to stir it, and you know, he'd say, who shot Michael Collins? No, they had killed the conversation. No, as I say, there was bitterness, you're right, between people a little bit removed, right? As I say, I got to know Michal Herbert very well, and definitely I didn't get it from him. You know, like, he would roguishly hop a ball.
Yeah.
You know, but,
that still happens.
Sorry?
That still happens.
Yeah, as long as you know who you're hopping with.
It was quite common, of course, most of you are old enough. Down to the newspaper, in Irish Press, the Independent. In my house was Fianna Fáil in a big way, but as a young lady was sent for the paper.
Yes.
I don't. That was known fact was the Irish Press were sent for, but sometime it might get Independent, and they wouldn't even look at it. Get out, bring it back, you know. So that was quite strong in those times as well.
The one thing that helped the press grow its circulation, the Independent and Times never really covered GAA matches.
That's right.
The press latched onto that, and it's really helped them to
Oh.
Tom, can I ask you something there about that sad case of Mary Hartley, the
Yeah.
poor woman that was killed? I was reading in Marcia Hartlett's book
Yeah.
that she was killed by a rifle in war, and victory in war, Marcia Hartlett said. But in the Limerick book that's just been published
Yeah.
and is available there in the library, it said that she was killed by a shell. And
Yes, I think so.
the other information somebody near Adair told me was the Dunraven Hotel itself was hit with the shell. She was killed within the building, but there was another one. If you look at from Adair Manor down to Collins's, it's a line of thatched houses. But there's one exception. Across the road from the Dunraven is a fairly modern timber building, and that was the compensation that Lord Adair got for Dunraven got for the damage that was done to his cottage. He didn't build a thatched cottage in place of it. He built a fine big house. But would you agree that she was killed with the shell rather than a cardamom?
Well, I think she was killed with a shell because, from what I can see, there's blood spattered all over the place. That doesn't come from a bullet.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I will say to you, Hackney married again.
Oh. Was he Limerick man?
Yes. Now, he had a daughter by the First Lady. She was a nun in America.
Oh,
I had contact with her.
good man.
Do you know, I had a lot of contact with her at a point in time. Now, she died, and she did, I said, 25, 30 years. But she, you know, she was a lovely person, no bitterness. Now, I think she did not, surprise, get on with her stepmother. It would be the first time that happens to her. But she was certainly, it was Seamus O'Conaide's sister that made the contact. You know, but I'd say that's going back to almost 40 years now.
And the husband was active where, in the city, or was it
The city. He was actually a printer. Hackney was a printer. He worked with Limerick Leader. He was a journeyman printer. Now, journeyman printers are not, from what I can gather, they're not the top of the scale. The top of the scale is a permanent, whereas the journeyman is moving around.
One of the dailies, I think it was Kathleen Daly's witness statements, said that she was shot in the head.
Well, now, as I say,
Yeah. That's where it's coming from.
yeah,
I think.
fair
Yeah.
enough. So there's conflict, contradiction in the
Would the Limerick Leader have been anywhere biased, or would it have been like the killing of a woman would be bad enough? Would they have been trying to take the harm out of it by saying it was a random explosion? Would they have been reason like to hide it?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that I read somewhere that there's blood scattered all over the place. Now, if that was the case, I would say it was an explosive rather than a bullet. But
Yeah,
I'm
well,
not an expert.
Yeah, but I think what our statement said was that the body was taken in to the front room, which is the piece that's now built onto the hotel, and that, you know, when the shell hit, obviously she was already in there. They will say.
She was operating as a first aid person.
Was she one of the few women killed in the Civil
Yes.
War? I'd say, was she?
There were very few women killed. I'm not going to say there wasn't any.
Well active.
No,
I'd say,
there was a bad case up in Tipperary of a rape. I think that was, it wasn't during the Civil War, but it was before the Civil War. And the guy involved, Phil Hogan, he was afterwards fell foul of the people above in the Oriel House. Now, he had moved from Tipperary to Dublin, I think, to get out of the way. Because up around Drummondale, I think it happened. he was involved with the group with drinking. They went into say a lawyer's house, and they raped the woman. Now, so I think she never recovered from it. Now, as I say, it was a fellow called Martin Hogan, and he was murdered afterwards in Dublin by the oil house.
This isn't a question, but you'll find the memorial stone of Ambrose and King there between
Yes, I've actually seen it. Thanks to my friend here, Shavy.
There was one there also for
Yeah.
the wires in Newcastle West.
Yeah.
There was a trust there.
But Ambrose, down as King and Ambrose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ambrose was a farmer, very substantial, they're still there. And they had an outside place in Newcastle, above where the new graveyard is now. What's that?
Churchtown.
In Churchtown.
The Tresham.
And he was coming home after selling hay the first week in August. And the Free State there said, Tom didn't mention it like, but 25,000 members of the Free State Army were former British soldiers. Came directly from the demobbed British soldiers, right? And they were from, these guys were local men from the town of Newcastle, which boast that they provided more soldiers to the British Army, 1418, per capita than any town in Ireland, including all the black holes in the 6 counties, right? So these guys are in Free State uniform, patrolling around, no discipline, you know, and they fill up with beer above a strand, and they're walking on about 3 miles from the town of Newcastle, and these guys are coming on in their horse and car, and for some reason, I don't know why they shot him anyway, and they went down the knee to do it, you know, that it was meant, and they were shot in the legs. They bled to death. You know, they were totally innocent men. But we'll say the casualties in the Free State Army were quite high, because most of the soldiers they had knew nothing about soldiering. Right, the soldiering was and their kid was the one that been killed, you know.
Yeah, my great grandfather.
I'll tell you a story about my own side of the country after they taking Newcastle. I'm from Broadford, and there was a Republican garrison in Drumcollar, and it was a McListon, Foxy McListon from Fina. Right, he was a tough cookie, but the Free State, what won the Civil War, of course, was artillery and armoured cars, and you're no good with your rifle and your grenade against that kind of stuff, because when Tom was telling about the town, they planted their 18-pounder at the Crooked Tree, and they blew up Courtney House. And the same thing happened above in Dublin, we'll say, when they attacked the forecourts. They got the guns from the Brits, you know. And there's a clear involvement, there's an officer from Clare, prominent man, right? And they made no fight with British soldiers, right? They were wearing Free State uniform. And the same thing when they captured the forecourts, with the fall of the forecourts, they attacked the triangle inside of the hotels in O'Connell Street, which were occupied by the Republicans. And they didn't do any good till they blasted them with artillery. You know, so they retreated. But when I was taught by Ben's brother now, a cousin of my own, that he saw Mad Mick Liston marching in Arrowhead formation down Church Street in Newcastle, retreating into County Cork. You know, and in Broadford there were, when the Free State established in West Limerick, they established 3 garrisons: Newcastle, Abbeyfield, and Glanduff Castle, which is between Drum and Broadford. And Sean Mylan decided that Broadford was in his brigade area, right, with just Cork is down on top of us, and we had 5 killed in the Civil War, in the War of Independence. You know, there were 15 in the whole of West Limerick, and we had 2 killed in the Civil War. So there's a string of great houses in Broadford. There was, there's a bit of fine land coming from Kilmallock back through Newtown, Milford, Drum, Broadford, almost into Ashford, and there was the wonder of great houses. So he puts a garrison, the Free State go into Glanduff Castle, and he puts a garrison into Corrimore House, right, and there's a mini civil war, and the priest, I all cure it with the famous Father Wall, Tom, all about him, right. I forget the name of the priest in Ashford, but the priest in Ashford was pro-treaty, and of course Father Wall was a die-hard Republican, but they negotiated anyway to avoid shooting, and the Free State garrison, which included Mike Brick, was there, as they withdrew to Rockbarton, near Buff, But, then the The Republicans had a slash and burn policy that destroyed the two farmhouses. You know, Corrimore House, which was only built in the, and we'll say, in that parish of the Broadford side of it though, the two principal landlords were Fitzmaurice and Sullivan, native Irish stock. You know, that we have a very complicated history, but it was disastrous, the Civil War. You know, it was disastrous in the fact that, you know, it was utterly disastrous. You know about the Free State courts? Yeah, among the Dáil Éireann courts, established by Dáil Éireann. It was a major achievement by the government, which hadn't, you know, set up by the first Dáil Éireann. But when the treaty was signed, Count Plunkett's son was fighting in the garrison in the forecourts, and Plunkett went to the head of the Dáil courts and got a writ of habeas corpus, looking for his son, you know, to be released. With the following day, the Free State government, were already just established, you know, made the Dáil courts illegal. And that's often seen as disastrous in that there was a possibility of an Irish legal system coming out of that. You know, and you see, one of our main failings is having British common law as our law. That's a huge... we say when the Brits are conquering Ireland in the 16th century, Fynes Morrison wrote a book as to why Ireland was never conquered. But one of the things he says is about Brehon law. He says that they never sent an army. Well, I think they never sent an army big enough to conquer the Irish, but the total was to the native Irish law, you know, and we have still British law. And what about the despising, Tom says, their own people? The bulk of the IRA was small, they were all classes now, but the bulk of them were small farmers and working men. And you know, there was no change whatsoever economically. And the First Minister for Agriculture says, what did he say? He said, the man for the road and the land for the bullock, you know, that mass immigration would still continue, and it did through most of my lifetime. But that's it. But I enjoyed Tom's talk. We should be very thankful to Tomas because he can stay cool with it, which other people can't.
Just in relation to the King and Ambrose shooting, the Kings came from Ballykinny, where that's my home townland. But when they finished drinking in Strand, the Free Staters were coming from Mount Collins, and when they came out of Strand, they were drunk. They took the wrong road, because the most logical road was the road through Moneygay into Newcastle West. But they came down towards Ballykinny. They went a roundabout way, so they made a mistake. So it's completely unfortunate that they took the wrong road, because those men would have been still alive, you know.
The autopsy is very strange.
We'll take one at a time. The last speaker there was Councillor Michael Collins, and the one before that was well-known Republican and historian Seamus O'Sullivan. Sorry?
A racketeer.
I could say more to you, but I think that's sufficient. And Seamus, of course, brought out a fabulous detailed book on the famine there some years ago, and as I said a little earlier, that hopefully in October we will have a famine commemoration walk that is coming from Granite to Knockfairn, or from Ballingarry to Knockfairn, will be decided later. Tim Mulcahy, I think. Tim?
Yes. Yeah, the same bullet that killed Ambrose and King, and if there had been a nurse there with basic knowledge and tied a rug, sorry, not a rug, but a big towel at the right point at the right time, that possibly could have been saved. Michael said they didn't all die, but some of them came in straight.
Okay.
But another man had got out of the car a short time before that. No, whether there were three initially in the car, but they both left young families and big families. Tom just quit. Was Paddy Naughton killed in action?
Paddy Naughton was killed inside Limerick City. He'd be from over around what's called over there. He's buried in the
Around Creeves, I'd say.
right?
Around Creeves, I think.
Yeah, he's buried over in the graveyard there. Oh Jesus,
Kilbrayton.
Kilbraden.
You talked about how there were so many moments where in Limerick early on that a civil war could have brought or broken out earlier than it actually did, and people decided to not start fighting when it would have been more to their advantage. In a more wider question for the whole country in terms of a civil war, do you regard it as inevitable, or Do you think?
No, it was not inevitable. I honestly believe that if Collins and their leader had gone together, and if they had come back together, that you see, Liam Lynch didn't want it. Let's be clear about it. We just drifted down into civil war because no one would take the thing by the scruff of the neck. Now, I don't care what people say. If Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness had done the same after the Good Friday Agreement, you know, one went one way, the other went the other way, we'd be still fighting in the north.
You don't think that because of the amount of arms people had nationwide, that kind of armed conflict with that many people
Well,
responsible to themselves in local areas, that those things could have broken out?
there's always going to be local conflicts because there's local scores to be settled. But I do think that if Dave and Collins came home together, went together and came home together, I do think that the thing would be a much stronger strict on trust for peace.
Would you blame Dave for that, more than Colin?
Okay, more than Collins, yes. I would blame him more than Collins because I don't believe he got the leadership that he could have. I think they should have gone together and stayed together. Now, everyone can disagree with me on that, but I honestly believe that. Now, as I say, the man that took Dave off the hook, I think, was Dan Green, and he's given no thanks for it. He went into the Dáil of his own volition. Yes, he had a revolver in his pocket, but he went into the Dáil of his own volition. He was the first anti-treaty TD to go into the Dáil. Now, I think, let's be straight. Dave's biggest contribution, I believe, to Irish life was founding Fianna Fáil. Because by so doing, he effectively took the gun out of Irish politics. Now, a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but I honestly believe that because it's, it was his biggest contribution. Like, also, a story told me by Theodore Dwyer, like when he was in the Free State Army, when Dave took over in 1932, and anything could have happened, right? But he said a lot was owing to Frank Aiken. He said Frank Aiken did not rub our noses in it. In other words, he didn't give them an excuse for a military revolt. That's what he told me, and I would say probably true that Aiken, dare I say it, was always like, whether you like it or not, he had the balls to, at the end of the Civil War, say, look, we can't go on. We called a halt to the Civil War. Now, in fairness, my book, that took courage. It took courage because most of us would let it drift on.
There was a young man back there that wanted to say something.
It was a very uneven fight when the Free State had machine guns and shells to fire at fellas who had only pistols and rifles.
I put you this way. Watch the British politicians all the time. Trust them. There are only two British Prime Ministers I would have trust: Tony Blair and John Major. I mean,
well, I'd agree with you, John Major, but I wouldn't support Tony Blair with the war in Iraq, would you?
Well, leave it. I would have, but leave that be as it may. What I'm saying is, what they did in Ireland, the Unionists were armed to the teeth. They had so much arms they could nearly have exported them. Right now, they gave the Free State enough arms to defeat the Republicans, and they gave the Republicans enough arms to con themselves into believing they could win a civil war. So there was a conflict down here, and there wasn't in the north. I mean, not against the Unionists anyhow.
How many months? Was it less than 6 months?
Right?
The Civil War?
It started on, we said, the 1st of July 1922, and effectively over at the May 1923, so you could say 10 months.
10 months.
Tom,
And there was 3,000 good people killed.
would you say the Republicans were very badly led in the Civil War, in that, if you think about it, the British had overwhelming force of arms in the War of Independence, and they had to negotiate a peace, whereas in the Civil War, even though the Free State had overwhelming force of arms, the Republicans really, they were defeated reasonably quickly in terms of militarily.
Well, you have to, the Free State had 59,000 armed men.
But how many British soldiers were here in the war?
Doesn't matter. They had 59,000 men under arms, right?
Mm.
Now, the Republicans had 23,000. Now, in addition, and more importantly, the Free State had access to artillery, machine guns, and armor cars. That what I'm saying is, the best Republicans could have done was prolong the thing. Now, what as I say, by the same token, my belief is that the British made sure they had enough to start it. I don't trust them, like the Upner, full to the gills with arms and ammunition, was floating around Cork Harbour without a naval escort and with no armed men on board. What's that saying?
Come get him.
Sorry?
Come get
Come
him.
and get him. And they said there was a big seizure of arms and ammunition in Clonmel, where a number of RIC sergeants got in contact with the IRA and handed them over to them. Now, I would have question marks about that one as well. They give them enough to get going, but not enough to win.
But wasn't that how the British left the arms for the Irish in Dublin? Wasn't that the case, was it?
In some case, yeah, some stuff, yes. That was handing over to the Free State.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm saying in Cork, come on, they gathered up all the excess arms and ammunition, put it on a ship, the Upner, put no military guard on the ship and no escort. What's that telling you? Come and get it, lads.
Tom, why didn't the Republicans do what they did best, and that was guerrilla warfare?
They did eventually.
But they didn't sustain it. Like they were sitting ducks in the towns.
You see, there's a problem now. When the Republicans went, dare I say, to guerrilla warfare, there's an awful lot of people in the country don't want to know about it. They're pro-treaty. They may have voted for Fianna Fáil in later years, and then making that, because someone changed their vote in 1932. But what I'm saying is that those people, whilst they had support in the countryside, they didn't have massive support. Like in the War of Independence, they had huge
They were all on one side, yeah.
But in the Civil War, no, they weren't.
Also, I suppose, Michael, it would have been more difficult to wage a guerrilla war against native Irish, because they knew the landscape so well, and they'd been part of the guerrilla action themselves anyway.
Yeah.
But an interesting point.
And with the power of the church, excommunication as well, that was probably vastly more influential then than it is now. But bishops had a huge say, and in their orders where you were refused sacraments, weren't you?
Yeah. No, there was a...
That was very hard for a pious...
Well, the English was very pious man. He had a brother priest and another brother, a Christian brother. But you're right, like when you think of it, the Bishop Killaloe, Dr. Fogarty, right? Now, Dr. Harty, the Bishop, Archbishop of Cassionemley, issued an order to his priests not to give absolution to men on death row. Right? Now, that's not against, that's in the belief that if they can't get the sacraments, they can't be executed. Now, that happened with four fellas in Boris Ali. Right? They were effectively in Archbishop Harty's territory. So what was done? They were transferred to Roscrea, or Bishop Fogarty had no problems. You know? So as I say, you're right, the bishops, you know, then as now as ever, well, I won't say now, then before that, they had fierce power. Now, in fairness to Harty, he used it fairly, right? Now, one thing that has been missed, in March 1923, the first memorial to the War of Independence was built in Maru at the connivance of Harty and a few others. In March 1923, now remember, or May 23, when the Civil War was only just over, the big memorial in Maru, you know, and it does seem that Harty gave a significant contribution to it.
Tom, you played in the Harty Cup, I'd say.
Right?
You played in the Harty Cup.
I'm a Harty Cup medal, a different thing.
You'll have to forgive my ignorance around this, but is there a link?
Yes, he's the man that put up the cup.
I see. Good.
Yeah, he was from Maru.
Well, there were a lot of Republican priests who were sent abroad at that time. Limerick's brother. He went to New South Wales.
New Zealand. New Zealand.
Fell out in New South Wales as I could get him.
Yeah.
Two Sean Miles, two brothers-in-law were sent to Tasmania. One ended up in Hobart. And the only reason they were sent there was because they were Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's thousands of them that were sent out. It was very tough on Liam Lynch's brother because his mother wasn't well, and his other brother was in jail. His other brother was in town.
And the other fellow was a madman in the Christian Brothers.
Well, I'm not sure, I didn't know that though. But he was sent, not long was he not sent to Sydney or Melbourne or...
Yeah, he was the youngest one from town.
He was sent the farthest out in New South Wales, as far away as we could get. It would take him 3 days to get from Sydney to where he was at that time. It was ferocious blackguard in the church.
Well, then is now it happens, right? An interesting one about Lynch's. There were 6 boys and a girl in the family, and the farm fell to the girl.
Oh yeah.
That must be most unique.
Yeah. The people that owned the land actually then just told they wouldn't allow a monument to be put up.
Well, yeah.
For a long time, I think. Eventually they were.
Yeah. See, there's kind of things going on. You know better than I do. There's spleens going on between families. There's, you know.
Yeah.
Tom, can I ask you, do you expect to see a united Ireland in your lifetime?
I'm 75.
Oh, you're 59. What do you think?
This is going to happen in the next couple of years, I don't think so.
How would you go about it?
Sorry? I consult you.
Seriously now. What's the conflict? The civil war is over.
Well, very simple.
All the wars are over.
Very simple. Can you convince our unionist brethren? You know. Now, if you get enough guns and you can force them in, fine. But can you convince them?
I think they're dwindling, and is it true
they're
now
not breathing
that
as
they're
fast,
more?
Tim, but they're not breathing that bad.
No, but no, but there are more immigrants now, if you include the Polish and all the rest, by numbers in the north of Ireland than there are sworn Orangemen. So
but what does that mean?
well, it simply means that they won't have political power. They're defeated politically, I think anyway.
Well, they're defeated politically maybe, but They're not going into Stormont, back into Stormont, and we know why they're not going back in.
There are 22 meetings about nothing.
They're no longer going to be the top dog.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
You know?
all.
That's the, to me, that's the main reason why they're not going back in.
Anyway,
Yeah, I get you to stop that.
I wish I could.
Any other questions? I'm delighted it was so peaceful I was expecting.
I know it's all the hurleys are missing.
No drink involved.
I had a little shot of something to be able to prepare for it, you know.
There was no fierce conflict in Limerick. That's the reality of it.
That is
Can
real.
I ask a non-political question?
Yeah.
When you want to release your book again, another run of your book?
Why not? I don't have the money.
No, that could be found.
How much nowhere to be found?
Quotation marks.
Every county council.
No, there's
There's a book in O'Mahony's that you can buy, and Tom Speed
that,
and his sponsors. So there you are.
Just one
That's the
question.
book. Tom
What
is
do
in
you
it.
feel about all the local history going from the library in Newcastle West?
Sorry?
What do you feel about all the local history that's in Newcastle West Library is now being all taken into Limerick? And Tom Ahern wrote an article there last week about it.
Well, I'd say it's, to be fair now, there should be what's around the county for people can access.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what's the point in having research library? People can access. I remember back about 40 years ago, inside in the what's called library in in O'Connell Street. All the cases were locked. I mean, if you're doing research, the only way you find out things by browsing through a book. But if you don't know what's in that book, and it's in a locked case, how can you browse it? No, I would say that every area should have its research facility. Right,
Again, Newcastle West County is that all the local histories, etc., in relation to West Limerick have been brought into the central location in the city. Isn't that what
Yeah, but they're not in the central location in the city. They're out in
my Ross.
The granary is closed down.
That's right,
yeah.
No, I will say
they're fairly inaccessible for the county or city people.
I will say that the guy that's over it is brilliant.
Oh, he is. He's excellent, and they're very helpful.
Sorry?
That's at the
They're
back.
very helpful.
It's up the back of Tormund, called it Tormund Park.
I mean, it's nearer to Clare. It's more accessible.
Well, I tell people it's in Clare.
Yeah, it is effective.
Technically, it's not.
But it's difficult to find if you're relevant.
I think it should be discussed. Dispersed, yeah. In other words, there should be a location here in Newcastle West with all the relevant research material for a certain district. The same with St Kilmallock.
I throw in Rathkeane.
Right?
I throw in Rathkeane.
You're a bit close.
Or it's copies.
We like our independence stuff.
That's the way it was. Newcastle West and all the West and all.
That makes sense.
But wouldn't an easier option be just the copies? We leave a copy in the local.
Well, digitise it to be able to the moment.
I think decentralised.
Digitise.
There's tea coming up, folks. We have a donation box at the door for anybody just to cover the expenses of the mint and the cameraman and the whole shebang. And there's tea, banana sandwich and all kinds of sandwiches coming up. So if you want to come forward for the tea and if you want to go away, and I'm sure the lads will continue debate the Civil War. As I said, in September we have Dr. Horgan, Tim Horgan coming, and there'll obviously be plenty of blood on that one because it's too late to carry.
What's the subject, Tom?
Could be
Peace in Kerry.
the war in Kerry, really. Similar to what he gets
He wrote
in
it,
you know.
He wrote in it too.
Yeah, he wrote a number of books. And also then, as I said, in October, it's the famine.